Fala pessoal, sejam bem-vindos aqui ao primeiro episódio do podcast Segredos da Escala, que é o podcast do VTurb. Se não me conhece, eu sou o João Campos, eu sou um dos cofundadores do VTurb. E no podcast aqui Segredos da Escala, a gente traz pessoas aí que já escalaram seus negócios para que tu consiga aí pegar uma ou duas dicas deles e escalar o teu negócio também. E o primeiro convidado aqui do nosso podcast é um cara foda, um cara brabo. Ele já vendeu mais de $1 bilhão com as copies que ele fez. Ou 5 bilhões de reais, e é B mesmo, tá pessoal? B de bola, de batata, de barco, não é M de milhão não, é B de bilhão. Ele é considerado um dos melhores, se não o melhor copywriter do mundo, e ele também é criador do método RMBC, que é o método de copy mais usado dos Estados Unidos e também aqui do Brasil. E além de tudo isso, ele também é dono do Copy Accelerator, que é um dos maiores masterminds de marketing direto do mundo, onde os maiores players lá de marketing se juntam para debater o porquê que as ofertas deles não convertem ou como fazer para elas converterem ainda mais. E tu provavelmente já sabe quem é, deve estar aí no título ou na thumb aqui do vídeo, que é o Stefan Georgi. Eu trouxe o Stefan aqui, pessoal, porque no Brasil a gente fala muito de ver o que os gringos estão fazendo, estudar o que eles fazem e eventualmente trazer as estratégias para cá, mas a gente não fala muito de entender o porquê que eles fazem o que eles fazem e como que eles fazem o que eles fazem, que essa é a parte realmente importante. Tu entender o processo de criação de ofertas para que tu consiga criar suas ofertas aí e escalar o teu negócio. Então por isso que eu trouxe o Stefan, porque quem melhor do que ele para explicar para ti aí como que ele cria as ofertas dele, para que tu aí possa criar as suas também e ganhar muito mais dinheiro. Então cara, esse aqui é o primeiro episódio, comenta aqui embaixo se tu gostou, deixa o teu like, compartilha com as pessoas que querem criar ofertas também. Se você tem algum feedback aí de alguma besteira que eu falei, é só comentar aqui embaixo também para poder melhorar para os próximos episódios. E também se inscreve aqui no canal do VTurb, porque a gente vai começar a soltar um episódio por semana do nosso podcast. E aí tu vai aprender a como escalar o teu negócio bem mais do que tu já escala hoje, ou começar a criar o teu negócio de fato, beleza? Então, cara, aproveita aí o episódio, espero que tu goste. Com vocês, Stefan Georgi. So, Stefan, thank you so much for being here with us today. You probably know that you are one of the most famous copywriters here in Brazil, even though you're not Brazilian, so that's kind of funny. And for the very few people that don't know you, could you please briefly talk a little bit about who is Stefan Georgi, what have you done, and what you're doing right now?
For sure, and I appreciate you having me on. It's an honor, and as I told you before we started recording, I really am honored to have such an audience in Brazil of people who admire me. So for those who do know who I am, thank you for being a fan. For those who don't know who I am, I'm a direct response copywriter by trade. I have sold over $1 billion US worth of stuff with my words. I've written for, I don't know, dozens or hundreds of different direct response businesses. I've created my own offers and brands that have scaled significantly. I've started numerous different companies in a variety of niches and categories. And I'm the creator of the RMBC method, which is a copywriting methodology that helps people to write sales copy in a step-by-step process. And I know.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's nice. So you spent like a lot of time writing, creating offers for yourself, for other people, and that's a lot of experience that you have in this domain. And one thing that I want to tell you is that in Brazil, the market is very, very unsophisticated. So people here, they have no idea what they're doing whatsoever. And when I say they have no idea, I really mean that, because they don't know how to write sales letters. They just copy each other out. You say that you made over $1 billion in sales using your copy. If you count all the Brazilian ripoffs that are using your copy, you can probably double that amount. Because people here in Brazil, they just don't know how to do stuff. Even though we have this like uneducated people, even with this, people are still making a lot of money. You know why? Because the market here just accepts everything that you put out. The market, like, you can just put out a benefit copy and it will still convert a lot. So my question is, imagine if you can, I don't know, be a Brazilian and bring all your knowledge, all this experience that you have here, and then you're going to create a direct marketing company using your entrepreneur's brain. What would you do to maximize the money, having this big opportunity here?
it's a good question. I think, knowing that, from what I understand, in the Brazilian market, doing physical products is more difficult than informational products. Like, the shipping is a bit less reliable. across the
Yeah.
country. Maybe that's how I understand it. So I probably look to do something informational. There's a lot of ways you could go. To be honest, if I were just going to come into the Brazilian market and I wasn't going to do something physical, then the most low-hanging fruit for me, given my knowledge and experience, would be something like kind of bizoppy, as in teaching other people, which there's a lot of that. I mean, I've met some people who are having lots of success in Brazil who are Brazilian, who I think there's a lot of bizop stuff where it's people teaching other people how to make money and things like that. But because internet marketing and digital marketing is really exploding in Brazil, I think there's a large market for that, a lot of interest, and there's probably, I'd have a pretty credible voice where to come in. And so I'd probably do something around there. For the average person who doesn't have the experience that I have, if I were that person and I was going to start something, I'd just go I'd have to understand the market better than I do, but look at some sort of, it would still be informational, probably, like a guide, like ebooks, stuff like that. But yeah.
One thing that Brazilians are doing right now is that they just go to the American sales letters and they see the mechanism that they are using, and they just rip off the mechanism here and try to write another lead for it. And they just take out all the American proof elements. Like when they say, hey, Harvard say that this is fine, they just change it to some Brazilian university or something, very black-heady stuff. And that's what they are actually doing right now, and it's working. So even though, some people are selling informational products, but there are also some people selling like supplements and making a lot of money too. And that's their main way of operating. They just grab mechanisms from the US and apply it here, and they keep doing that. So the BizOp thing is actually a very nice way to make money. And yes, there are a lot of people making serious money here in Brazil. Do you think that there are some BizOp guys that we should inspire ourselves in the US to get ideas to run here in Brazil?
Well, yeah, it's a funny thing because on the one hand, it's like I don't want to say people who are then going to get ripped off, but at the same time, those people aren't selling in Brazil anyway. So, as far as BizOp goes, I think Chance and Abdul, who have Modern Millionaires, are good people to look at. They're doing healthy mid-8 figures with their business. Arguably what Cole Gordon's doing is not BizOp, but it sort of is, as far as like he's got two sides for closers.io, right? One side is placing sales teams and helping business owners to have phone sales teams. The other is running ads to people saying, hey, you can make money by being a phone closer, right? And doing phone sales. And he's done very well. He's at 30 million plus per year US. So those are two people to probably look at. And yeah, those are at least two I would look at. I have a question though for you. And that's, I wonder about like Harvard, right? Because from my perspective, and maybe this is my US centric viewpoint, it's like Harvard is so famous because I've run into this. I'm actually with another client, Svelte, which is Meredith Shirk, and they're doing several $100 million a year US in revenue. And we, through the agency I have now, we're writing a bunch of copy for them. And we're also helping them with taking a bunch of their really established offers and taking them to different markets. And that's come up a couple of times because they feel like, oh, if it's for the South African market, for example, find a university in South Africa. But I feel like, well, Harvard's so well known that from my perspective, it still feels more credible to say Harvard than it does to say the University of Sao Paulo or something like that. But I'm curious if that's the fair assumption, or if you think it, like, is there any data, is what I'm really asking, that says, instead of using Yale or Harvard or Princeton, you're using, something like a Brazilian university. Is there any data that shows that that's actually better? I'm just curious if you know, because I think
no, I don't know. The thing is, Brazilians, one thing that we have here in Brazil is that Brazilians own Brazil, because truth is, most Brazilians, they don't speak English, so it's very hard for them to consume English content. It's hard for US companies to get inside Brazil because of government regulations. So if you're a Brazilian, you have everything to run, to create a good business here in Brazil. And people from other countries, they can't get in. And that same goes for proof elements. So if you say Harvard, this, I don't know, old Brazilian lady, she has no idea what Harvard is. So it's not a proof element for her. But it really depends on the niche that you're targeting. But most like urgent problem niches like weight loss, skin and diabetes, arthritis, this kind of niches, they have no idea what Harvard is. So that's why it's better to use a Brazilian proof element. But that's only for Brazil. I run offers in Latin America and Harvard works better. And yeah, I never tried in Europe. And I also run offers in Nigeria, in Africa one time, but that's it. So in Brasilia, I think I know it works best. In Latin America, I don't have that much data, but I know that Harvard works because I have like friends that are just ripping off American sales letters and running here in the Latin American, and it is working. But if you do the same thing in Brazil, it will not work. So you actually need to use the Brazilian proof element, and that's not only for Harvard, but most of the time for the whole proof, for all the proof elements that you're using in your sales letters, even the mechanism. Because in the US, for example, if you're creating a weight loss offer, you're going to probably talk about keto because it's very famous. Or there's even an offer called Keto Boost or something that you guys were. It was huge in the US a few years ago. I don't know if it's still running today. But in Brazil, people have no idea what keto is. They really have no idea. So you can't use that. And the market is really very different. So yeah, to answer your question, there is a difference. Yes.
Cool. Good to know. Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. And as I said, people in Brazil, they just copy each other out. They have no idea what they're doing. But it's still working. There are some, I don't know, 18 years old that are millionaires. They're just selling like PDFs online and it's working like crazy. Do you think that if we create a good sales letter for the Brazilian market in the Stefan Georgi style, like a very good mechanism, a very good lead, do you think that's actually a very big opportunity to do that? Or you think that because the market is not that sophisticated, it's better to just go with a normal approach and just like a benefit oriented copy or something like that?
It's hard to answer that definitively without knowing the market really intimately, which I don't. I would imagine that a more full-on sales letter would do quite well. You know, I think the short answer is always going to be to test it, but I would imagine, because even in the US, you constantly have people going, oh, long sales letters don't work anymore, and people have short attention spans, and you know, there's constantly trying to get away from longer format sales copy, and yet it just keeps working better than everything else across the board. There's always exceptions. Someone might have a short thing that does well, but generally long form stuff just still remains the king. And so for the Brazilian market, I would imagine it's similar. There's data points you'd have to look at. For example, what percentage of people in the market within Brazil that you're targeting are going to consume on a cell phone versus a computer? I would guess cell phones are really high. I would guess it's a lot of mobile.
Yeah.
So, for that reason, maybe the VSL would need to be shorter, or you need to make sure that it's very much optimized for mobile, or maybe a text sales letter would be better because, like, historically for me, text sales letters have actually, and you have a video hosting platform, so I'm not trying to say, but historically text sales letters will often convert better on mobile because people want to skim through and stuff like that. But that's changed too. It depends on the format, right? Horizontal versus vertical view, a lot of other important elements. So
yeah.
And I think that, just the last note, to me, because you guys are behind, but even in the US, like for example, in 2015 or 16, I wrote like a sales letter for turmeric, right? Which is like obviously a healthy spice. And at the time there was like one other turmeric offer from Cody Bramlett, who I later partnered with for a period of time. But I basically looked at it and it was a very basic sales letter. And I was like, oh, if I bring my DR abilities, right, my direct response copywriting powers here, I bet we can crush it. And then we did. I mean, that thing was doing like 500, 1,000 front ends a day, making $100,000 a day, all that kind of stuff. And then Same thing with CBD, right? I'm pretty sure I was like the first person to do like a VSL sales letter for CBD. And that was maybe 2016 or 17. And same thing. I mean, we were doing sometimes 500,000 a day in sales. And there's a bunch of other people doing, short form landing pages and things like that. But often what I found, at least in the US, is, it's a huge opportunity. When you find something that's selling well, but nobody's taken a long form kind of direct response approach to it, that, means you're gonna be the first and you're gonna make a lot of money. And I would imagine, while there may be certain nuances, that it's the same thing in Brazil too.
Yeah. And how do you find these things that are actually selling well? Do you have like some place that you go looking for it, or maybe from experience?
Generally, historically, it's been just being tapped into the market, seeing ads that are running, seeing reviews. I think knowing your market. So a lot of direct response, long form sales copy lends itself to informational products for sure, but then on the physical side, which I have done even more of, supplements or devices that solve a problem quickly, where the price point is between $27 on the very low end up to about $97 is a really good sweet spot for physical products. So when you'll see trends, like for another example in the same line of examples as turmeric and CBD, was like, for a period of time in the US, there were these anti-snoring devices that were it became a big category. And so you had people putting these sort of mouth, retainer things in your mouth that were supposed to stop you from snoring. And then there was also something called a tongue retaining device that holds your tongue out so you can't snore. And a partner at the time, actually the same one that I did the turmeric and CBD stuff with, we were like, wow, all these e-com companies are crushing it. We're seeing ads everywhere. So let's do a sales letter for a anti-snoring device. And it was the same thing. It did extremely well. So I think a lot of times you'll see, if I see something that's doing really well in a market that I know the market, then that's really the biggest thing. And where you see that is, again, it's not like in-depth analytical research, but it's more like pay attention to ads, pay attention to what you're seeing, you're getting served like on websites, things like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's a very good way to actually create the offer, to just see what is selling and then create a good VSL around it to scale even more. So one question about that, what do you think about introducing new mechanisms here in Brazil? Like, instead of seeing what is already working and trying to create a campaign around it, what if we just, I don't know, see what kind of mechanisms are working in the US or used to work in the past, and then bring this here to Brazil and present it to Brazilians? Because truth is, they never had contact with this mechanism. So if you just write a sales letter to this mechanism, if the mechanism is good, then chances that people will believe it and they will want to buy the product, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what I would do. I don't think, if I were going to write an offer for a client in the Brazilian market, I would not be trying to come up with the world's most novel and new and complex mechanism. I would look at something that works. And we do this a lot. So we work with guys, Mattia Paganelli and his partners, and they sell in Italy and in Portugal and in the UK. Italy's their biggest market. And we love, we've helped them go from, I don't know, a couple million a year to like eight figures a year. And we love writing for them because that we write great letters, but myself, my two partners, and through our agency now, it was originally myself and my one protege, Luke Mills, but now he's a partner. And so, but we love writing because for that exact reason, we're like, we'll find a mechanism that's good, but we're like, well, it's not, in the US, it might not work, but in Italy, it's not apples to apples. It might be a little bit different, but the same concept of like it's stuff behind the US, so it works. And I think the same thing for Brazil. I would just take mechanisms that are proven and that work and transport them over. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that being said, right, for example, you brought up keto earlier, and I would imagine keto could brush in Brazil, but I wouldn't call it keto. I would just explain the mechanism behind keto. I would explain, the shocking truth that eating more fats to burn fat, right? Or eat more fats to get skinny or whatever it is. And I would just simplify it down. So it could still be keto, and we know keto works, right? So that's great. You're helping the customers that they follow the guide, but you don't have to call it keto. So that's another big part of it.
Yeah, okay, I got it. And since you're talking about creating offers, when you're going to create a brand new VSL, what do you think is the 80-20 in your process? What people should really focus on?
I think the mechanism is extremely important. You need a novel way. I think a novel being novel to the market. So what's novel in the US isn't novel in Brazil, right? So keeping that context in mind, but a novel way of explaining the real cause of their problem, and it needs to be something that's believable, realistic, that intuitively makes sense. Perhaps there's a level of testable proof. So by testable proof, I mean something like bite the inside of your cheek, and do you feel like a tinge? Well, that's because that's like your tissues like dying, and I don't know, something physical, like push your finger down, and if depending on how long it takes for your skin to return color, that shows how old you are. Whatever, some kind of interesting testable element. But again, it has to be believable, and it has to be like almost viral. I think that's the thing I've really realized with mechanisms is I really want my mechanism to be an idea that somebody can take and remember very quickly, and that they want to then go share with 5 other people, because they'll sound smart and they feel like accomplished, like, oh, I learned something, I know something. And so you
want to increase their status. You want to give them an argument that they can use to defend themselves when someone asks, hey, why did you buy this shit? And then they can say, yeah, I bought this because this does this and that. And then they actually learn something, and they are perceived as more smart to their friends.
Exactly. It's a really often overlooked element that's really important. So the mechanism, the lead is always going to be extremely important.
Yeah.
And then just research on like understanding the market too, right? If you don't understand the market and their pain points, then nothing else really matters. If you'll get the lead wrong, the mechanism doesn't matter if you're not speaking to the market and meeting them where they're at.
That's really interesting, because the way that I see the mechanism is that it is like a proof point that your sales letter has. So the goal of the mechanism is to make someone believe in the method that your product uses. So for example, if in your mechanism, if your product is a collagen supplement, then you really need to make people believe that if they get more collagen on their skin, they will become young again. So a good way that I see to actually create offers is to just find very believable mechanisms, because this is the goal of the mechanism, to make someone believe in them, to then sell the product later. And I never thought of this virality thing. I always thought about the proof thing and how to make the mechanism more believable. And actually, that's what most Brazilian gurus here, they teach. They say, hey, when you're going to create an offer, find the most, the mechanism that has the biggest proof. So then you can use all this proof in your sales letter, because then people will believe in your method, and then if your offer is good, they will buy it. And can you explain more about this virality thing? And do you think that this is more important than the proof side of the mechanism, or you think that the proof side is more important than the virality side?
I'm gonna think about which one I think is more important. My gut reaction is they're like 50-50. As in they're neck and neck. Because I think for something to be viral or have virality, it needs to be easily transmissible, meaning easily transmitted from one person to another, easily spread. In order for that to happen, it needs to be easily understood. It also has to be interesting and exciting. Someone's got to feel like they want to spread it. There's usually, to your point, a deeper benefit to transmitting than just transmission. Nobody's transmitting because of that, right? So if somebody shares a funny viral meme, part of the reason they're sharing it is that other people will go, ha, that's funny. And they'll look at your status goes up as somebody who has a good sense of humor or who recognizes funny things. But similarly, if you can share useful information about the real cause of wrinkles or crow's feet or dull, saggy skin, or why you put on weight and can't lose it after pregnancy, or whatever the thing is, and you can share a really good, interesting, compelling reason, like, yeah, you increase status and more people, and it doesn't have to be online, it can be within your community, your friends, your family. I mean, to your point, justifying to a spouse, right? Like a woman goes and buys some weight loss pill and the husband goes, oh, that does not really work. Maybe it's BS. And she's like, no, because like here, she explains why, right? Now she can back up that decision and he can't say as much about it. So she wants that, right? The guy who buys something wants that to explain to his buddies and not look dumb. So yeah, I think that's extremely important. I think that proof is also very important, but there's a fine line there in that ultimately people will still buy for emotional and not logical reasons, right? They kind of make the decision to buy with their heart first, and then their brain, their heart has to communicate with the brain and give the brain the facts that back it up so the brain signs off on it, right?
Yeah.
And so the reason that matters is because emotion is sort of king, but then a lot of proof elements are more logical in a way. And it's like, yeah, okay, like Harvard or whatever the equivalent is in Brazil, or lots of people using it. So that's important. But the trick is to not go so overboard where you're just listing off so many proof elements that a person is bored because they're like, I don't care anymore. All right, you've convinced me, but now like back to me and my life and my struggles and my story and my hopes and my dreams. So I really think they're neck and neck, but I think I really do look for any mechanism that I write to have that component of virality to where I can easily, and like if I'm working on a mechanism myself for an offer or for a client, whether or my own or whatever, I really need that mechanism to a place where I can explain it on demand in 30 seconds or less, ideally 2 to 3 sentences, maybe up to 5 sentences. And that I not only can, but I want to, because I think it's interesting. So even with my wife, Laura, like I've done this many times before, where I'll be like, oh, I found this interesting mechanism, and I'll explain what it is. And then if she goes, oh, right, then I know like I'm on the right track, So
yeah. Nice. Well, one thing that I noticed is that if you have a mechanism that has built-in virality, it's actually easier to write the lead, right? Because you have all these elements that you can use in the lead. Is that how you think?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I was literally working with a long-term, very large client last night. They sent over a list of ingredients for a supplement formulation and asked for my opinion and if I had any additions or whatever. So I did some research on it, and I can't give away on the podcast, but basically one of the ingredients I just saw like really some interesting hooks. So even in my write-up to them, I'm like, oh, we could do this in the lead, we could do this in the lead. But it's because I was looking into the ingredients and how they work and stuff, and it immediately gave me some really interesting ideas for sure. Yeah, I mean, definitely that's a huge part of it. I definitely like to have, I actually write the leads last pretty much every time, and I've gone back and forth on that throughout my career. There's periods where I've been like, oh, I like to write the lead first because I'm just so inspired and dialed in. But lately, I generally write. I mean, right now, I have something that I'm going to ship to a client for our agency tomorrow that it's too long right now. It's like 12,000 words, so I need to cut it down anyway. But that's without the leads. But that's the only part I haven't done is the leads. But I've got like 3 or 4 ideas. I think it's just way easier to write the leads once you've read the rest of the sales letter, because you have so much else to reference and things appear. Even when you plan your sales letter, things sort of ideas show up, or you end up talking about something more than you thought you would because you realize how interesting it is. And so for that reason, I do the leads last. But long-winded answer, but yeah.
Yeah, actually, me too. Sometimes I also do the leads in the first thing, but it's actually very hard because the lead only talks about what's in the sales letter, right? So if you don't have the sales letter, how we will talk about it? And that's a little bit hard for me, but I understand your point. And well, do you have any tips on how to write leads? You say that you found some good angles when you were researching for this client. And you have the RMBC method where you actually teach the lead. And from studying it, my conclusion, my personal opinion is that the lead is made out of three main elements. The first one is the promise, then you have proofs, and then you have curiosity. So that's it. You basically do a main promise, and then you have, after you spend the whole lead trying to prove your promise, and then giving up some small reason why people should consume the content, and that's the curiosity part. So, for example, when you tease the mechanism of the solution or the problem or whatever, it is both proof and curiosity, because you're proving that your promise is real because there is a backstory and there is a reason why this promise is real. But there's also curiosity because people think, okay, this is new, so what is it? And then people want to read it too. So that's how I think about the leads. Just one very big, believable promise and lots of proof, lots of curiosity. Sometimes this promise, actually, it's a promise of value. Sometimes it's a promise that I say, hey, watch this video and I'm going to give this benefit to you. Or sometimes it's just a story. So the value is in the entertainment, like Chris Haddad lead or something. And when you're thinking about leads, when you're writing leads, how do you actually come up with a very killer lead? The stuff that I say to you, does it make any sense? Or how do you see that? What's your opinion?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think you're overall right on the three elements. You could argue, I mean, you've seen RMBC and my kind of outline for a lead. There's other pieces, but you could argue a lot of those other pieces fall within those three categories. Maybe emotion could be separate depending on the lead. I mean, I think having emotion in there for a lot of niches is important. But when I'm writing leads, I'll tell you what I'm doing literally today that works best from my perspective, which is generally, and this is whether it's me or again through my agency, we're working with, multiple 8 and 9 figure US dollar clients, like really the biggest of the big, is we'll generally write like 3 to 4, maybe even 5, like openings of the lead. Like basically the first 150 to 300 words. It's like 5 different angles, hooks, big ideas, whatever it is. And then the second half of the lead, or the second 2/3 of the lead, is essentially the same. And so what we find generally works the best in the US today is curiosity, right? But really good curiosity. The emotional punch in the gut pig stuff is definitely something that works, but it just tends to these days actually not work as well as curiosity. But it has to be relevant and interesting curiosity. So for example, I'm partnered in like a dog supplement offer with a guy, and we had another writer do a couple of versions, and it was like okay, and then I just I rewrote, or I wrote a new letter for it, and we're just like testing it now, and it's doing really well. Like it's not a huge amount of data, but positive ROAS on Facebook, like 5% conversion rates on like really good big name email lists and stuff like that. So I think it'll be really successful. And I gave James, who's the operator, 5 leads, and we're split testing the first 2. So one is very emotional about sort of think back to the very first day that you got your dog. Were you excited, nervous, right? Like, how did you feel? And, you probably felt like you would do anything for your dog, and like the bond has only grown. But now that your dog's getting older, like, it needs your help. And, this is like, essentially like, it's like that emotional idea where I wrote one, which a lot of people may have seen because somebody on YouTube did a 2-part breakdown of this offer called Stem Cell Restore. And it's a really good letter. It's one of my, by US standards and stuff, it's a little bit aggressive, but it's one of my favorite letters I wrote. And it starts with the idea of like a time capsule, because a lot of people in the US buried a time capsule, especially in that market in like the 50s and 60s. It was like a big thing where you put memorabilia, like little things that are part of your life, and into like a box or something, you bury it. And the idea is you'll dig it back up in 10, 20, 30 years and be like, wow, look how life was back then. But there's a lot of sentimentality to that. And if you bring up that idea, my thesis, the reason I think that Stem Cell Restore is one of my most favorite letters I ever wrote, I think top like 5 favorite letters, is because that was a big swing to take, because it's different. It's sort of talking about this emotion, but the theory was that you're going to immediately put somebody in a different emotional state. You're going to be reflective. If you're reflective, then you move a little bit slower, which means you're more open to more of my message. If you're open to more of my message, we know from the data, you know this from having the largest video hosting platform in Brazil, that if somebody lasts for 30 seconds, they're going to last for 2 minutes. If they last for 2 minutes, they're going to last for 4 minutes, right? If you can, the longer you can keep them, the better. So making them reflective and sentimental, it's also creating a rush of dopamine, all these neurotransmitters. So in that case, that was lead number 1, was about the first time you got your dog and all the emotion behind it. Lead number 2 that we're testing against was about, actually, I think, make sure I get this right. It's one about sort of like, why do 2 dogs who are like the same age, why can one be so healthy and one looks like all old and beat up and stuff like that, right? And there's like sort of all these curiosity elements, and that one's doing pretty well too, but the emotional one is winning. But I guess so the point is, you don't know that unless you have multiple kind of mini. And again, for that letter, the second 2/3 of the letter is the same for each of the 4 leads. In fact, the emotional one I just mentioned is maybe like 100 words. And then the other one, the curiosity one, is maybe 150 or 200 words, and that's the same lead. And that the conversion rate difference is significant. And so I really, you got to test stuff, right? It's amazing what even a different headline can do. And B is really doing them, like I said, sort of like micro leads or whatever you want to call it, like the first, 30 seconds to 2 minutes, like have a bunch of variants, because that makes a massive difference.
Yeah, we actually, I'm the one of the few Brazilians that actually do that. It's actually very, very important, because you have a different point of contact with the market. And if you can hook them in a different way with a different expectation, maybe it's better. And in the data that you see every day, how much of a difference do you think that these like micro leads they actually make? Have you seen, I don't know, double the conversions or something like that?
Yeah, it makes a really big difference. I mean, another example, Jeremy Reeves, who's a offer owner here in the US, and he's a former copywriter and member of Copy Accelerator, which is like the mastermind I have. We wrote a new letter for him. We did 2. One was for blood pressure. And basically, this just went live a couple months ago. And it was funny because he told us, it's not converting that great. And, I basically wrote it. Like we had another writer, and the writer wasn't good enough. I had to rewrite it. And so anyway, basically his like theory on it was like, I think we talked about like pine bark in it or something, which is an ingredient that at least for blood pressure. And we literally just like removed the mention of that word, like just removed pine bark, and it skyrocketed and is now doing really well in the US, right? And so it's not just like as simple as like a word. Native Path, Chris Clark, who's a really good operator, he owns Native Path, which is a big brand in the US. He was saying the same thing with collagen. They had like their current control said collagen in the headline, and even like because we wrote one for them called, and we talked about caveman collagen, and we have tested. It did. So basically, his control converts at 3.7% on cold traffic, Facebook stuff like that. Our version converted at 2.7%. So our version still did pretty good, but it did beat the control. But he was like, if you take out caveman collagen, it might do a lot better, because he said how for their control they mentioned collagen, in the very beginning, and it was okay, and then as soon as they removed it, it skyrocketed and became this massive control. So it's not even just that the micro leads make a huge difference, but even just specific words make a huge difference. So yeah, it's really important, I think.
Why do you think that? Maybe when you say collagen, you create an objection in their minds, or do you have an explanation for that?
Yeah, in the US, collagen is so well known at this point that I would guess people have a lot of. Let's go back to curiosity. Like our idea, our thesis was that caveman collagen is different than normal collagen. And so people will be curious to know what caveman collagen means. But realistically, what may have been happening, and again, the thing converts pretty well. If we had run that offer from scratch and have a control, he would have been like over the moon happy, but we had a really tough control to try to beat. So keep that in mind. But, I think what maybe really is happening is there's a certain set of people who are like, see collagen, and there's no curiosity because they have a lot of preconceived notions of, oh, I know collagen. I've taken collagen before. Oh, collagen, I've heard people talking about that. Oh, right. There's an immediate versus if you're like, this like, I don't know, like this caveman gum or something like that. I mean, gum is weird, but something that's just more broad or like abstract or a little bit, right? Then they're like, what the hell is that? And so I think that just the idea in the US, because collagen is so well known, it's in every Whole Foods or, every grocery store has got collagen supplements now. All kinds of foods are like with collagen. I think it's just, it's not that you obviously have to bring up that it's collagen and you have to make the argument for why it's different from other collagen, right? And going back to the mechanism and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But going back to that first 30 seconds to 2 minutes, it's like you kind of need to be a little bit more hooked before you bring up collagen. So that way you're not finding an excuse to leave right away.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's actually really cool. I never thought of that. So thank you for that. And okay, so let's say that after you create your offer, you create a good mechanism and a lead that you also think it's good, and you run it and it actually makes sales. So it's actually converting on cold traffic. Do you have any tips on how to increase the conversion of your VSL, like something that you guys are doing over and over again to these offers that are just performing?
I mean, there's a ton. I think I always go back to testing additional leads as, from a copy perspective, the biggest needle mover, because as we've discussed, those first couple hundred words can make a huge difference. I think looking at.
But you mean the whole lead or just the micro lead?
The first 100, the micro lead. I use it interchangeably, but I would test unless you had an idea for a whole new lead. But again, mostly the second half of the lead is going to be like, promising stuff, like, so either like maybe it's testimonials. It's sort of the same idea again and again and again, the same structure. So that doesn't mean you couldn't test that, but I'd be more interested in that very beginning. I've described it before, where essentially a sales letter and a sales funnel are the same idea, right? And so the more people you hook in at the beginning, the more people stay till the end, and the wider the funnel is. Whereas the fewer people you hook in at the beginning, it doesn't matter how good the rest of it is, the amount of people who reach the checkout page are going to be fewer, right? So if you look at it from that perspective of like a funnel, it's like it makes sense to spend the most time up here, because this is where you've got the most eyeballs and the most opportunity to keep people proceeding down your funnel. Versus if this part sucks, it doesn't matter. Anything you do down here doesn't matter, right? It's always going to matter more up here. And so that's from a copy perspective. But there's a lot of interesting optimizations you can do, like testing price points, obviously. But a lot of people don't test price points. They see what other people are doing with price points, and they sort of just go with that. But it's very interesting. I mean, I've had offers that it goes both ways. I've had offers that I was, say a physical thing that was $49 for a bottle, and I increased it to $69 for a bottle, and like the conversions didn't change. I just made more money. I've had some offers where we started at $69, but it was $29 per bottle, was way better for a single bottle. And even though the average order value was lower, the amount of conversions was so much higher that we made way more money running it that way. It's really, important. I think people's instinct often, at least in the US, I wonder if it's the same way in Brazil, is to price it lower. Actually, I guess it's both. Like experienced operators, I feel like always want to try and price it higher and make more money, but it's like you need to really test that. But I think a lot of people think like they have to go lower. Like they almost talk themselves out of money by trying to lower the price for no reason. So I wouldn't, just do that, but I would test it. And then, I think upsell number one can be kind of underrated. People don't always pay enough attention there. I mean, you can get a lot of money from that first upsell, whereas upsell 2 and 3 don't really matter. I don't spend time on those. I don't care about them. In most cases, there's exceptions to everything.
Yeah.
But
That's
yeah,
crazy because in Brazil, people they do the exact opposite of that. So their upsell usually sucks, but then they think, okay, I have to make this really big funnel with upsell 2, 3, and then some downsells and whatever, and they just keep like they make this very big funnel with lots of upsells and downsells. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't work.
and it doesn't matter because it can go back to the whole funnel perspective in general, right? It's like,
Yeah.
this matters. Even the people who make it to upsell 2, 3, it's so diminishing that, generally upsell 1, depending on what you're offering, and I mean, there's a lot of factors, but it should convert at like a minimum of 20%, as high as like 50 or 60%. Occasionally you hear about something converting at like 70% when it's all over the place, but really like at least 30 to 40% for most things should be like, so, but then upsell 2 is like 10%, 12%, maybe you get to 15%. And upsell 3 is like 5%. Like, it just doesn't matter. But the amount of effort you would have to make to get upsell 3 to go from 5 to 7%, it's like if you just focused on the front end over here, the giant funnel, or even upsell 1 perhaps, it's going to make way more sense. Like, it's the same idea where, people who like, people will create like an offer and it's like kind of working, but not fully working, right? It's sort of like break even, they're losing a little bit of money. And so then they're like, I'll create another offer. And I'll create another offer. And suddenly they create like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 offers. And it doesn't mean that if an offer is a total bomb, it may make sense to just move on to another. But if it's kind of like middle of the road and shows promise, and you think like the first thing you should do is focus on trying to dial that one in more. And then if it's making pretty good money, finding ways to make even more money from that offer before you try to replicate it a bunch of times. Because it's the same kind of idea with, I think, upsells too, where people are like, I'll just keep adding more upsells and downsells. That's going to fix it. But it's like, no, like, go fix the initial offer, right?
Yeah. And since we're talking about that, what do you think is like an average offer that you can invest more time and that maybe you can make it work? Because for my operation, well, it depends on your cost, of course. So if you're selling supplements, then your ROAS will be higher. But usually if I spend, I don't know, $1, if I get 1.5 back, then I think that's good to optimize. If I get less than that, then I think, okay, this offer, I mean, I can still test a lot of leads and everything, but I usually can't make it work. Do you have that in the US, like a process in your mind where if an offer gives you this kind of stats, and you know that if you change this and that, you can make it work?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is not an exact science, because I've seen this. It would really depend for me on how, like, I would definitely take some shots of additional leads, for example, because I have a lot of cases of this like happening, right? Like, I wrote, Burn, which is like a VSL for VShred, and like that thing did, I don't know, probably over $100 million. It was doing like 5,000 plus runs a day. So a lot of runs for supplements, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah. But the initial lead was at like, well, initially it was like 0.3%, right? And it was like, I was on cold traffic on Facebook. And it was like, all right, well, shit, that's not good. But then I saw they were basically showing the button from the very beginning for the VSL. And I'm like, hey, we should put the button on a timer. And VShred was at that point doing about 70 million a year. The next year they did 205 million. A lot of that was because of Burn, right? Which is pretty cool. But, and like, they sort of like argued with me, not about, and Nick was just like, what? And then, because they did a more e-commy like info stuff. So, so that got to 0.6%. But then I wrote another lead for them, and that got to like over 1%, which is for them what they needed to scale like weight loss at a really high volume, like a consistent 1%, right? On cold traffic on Facebook with their media buying and at that time and with all the costs. And so the lead was a huge deal. I mean, it was basically a 33% lift, but that was the difference between, or maybe more like a 40% lift. And that was the difference between scaling to $100 million versus the offer doesn't work, right? So there are cases like that. So I guess it comes down to me more so. It's like, but if things like a total complete bomb, then I'm trying to think like numbers, right? It just, but again, I've had things that are like zero. Like if you're at 0.7 ROAS, let's say, but I'm like, man, I know the market is there. I mean, I really feel like I've got some other lead ideas that maybe would really resonate more. Maybe there's something with the language So this dog offer as an example, the new version I wrote is basically double the conversions of the old one. But what I did there, no one got tested pretty extensively, but a huge part of it was the old one was talking about, it was like a probiotic. So it was talking about like gut health and like your dog's like messy poops and, gas and things like that, which is what all these dog offers talk about. But I own a dog and I'm like, I was sitting there and I'm like, you know what? Like, I never sit around being like, oh, my dog's poops are too messy. Like if you have a dog, like your dog might have like diarrhea sometimes, but nobody's like, it's not a real bleeding neck problem where you really like care. It just doesn't work. People just say, oh, it's probiotics, so I'll talk about digestion. But it's like this version that I wrote really focused on aging and how probiotics support something called methylation, which is a really important process in your body. And essentially is the idea that you can give your dog not extend their life necessarily, but that you can give it more years of good life, more healthy quality years. Right. And by the way, when you do that, and I just went to Amazon, go back to research, and I was like, what are the top 2 supplements on Amazon for dogs, the 2 categories? And it was like allergies and joints, right? Not anything about poop and digestion and all this other stuff. So I just started talking about allergies and joints more, right? So I changed the same product, but I changed like the promise and the pain points and the mechanism. So I did rewrite it, but again, that's the difference between, this offer that I would imagine will do, I don't know, 15 to 30 million in the next year, could potentially do way more, and an offer that never gets off the ground. So, so I don't know. I mean, the conversion rate wasn't like bad on the first offer. It was probably in the middle of the road, but I knew, I'm like, I know dogs, it's a good niche. Like I know that lots of people buy stuff for their dogs. I know pet supplements can work. So if I know the market is good and the conversion rate is just not there, then I probably am more inclined to like, try to rewrite it a couple of times or at least once or twice before I'd completely give up on it.
So Stefan, thank you so much for your time here. And I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And I will send you the link for the podcast and stay tuned.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody in Brazil for listening.
All right. Thank you.